So welcome, and we're super excited to talk about socially conscious animal community today. This is a new thing. It's a new thing that has come together with the CEOs of the large animal welfare organizations in Colorado, and it's actually catching on nationally already, even though it's not completely finalized. It's because we're so desperate as a community for something like this. And we've talked for years and years and years of what are the unintended consequences of no kill, why doesn't that make sense? But we haven't articulated well, what do we believe in? Who are we? What are we for? Why are we even repeating this no kill rhetoric? Why don't we just talk about what we envision the best world of animal welfare to be? So that was our kind of charge when we started with this. And we started with socially conscious animal shelter. And I know it's a mouthful.
Say it 5 times fast.
And at first we kept saying, every time we said it, we said, we're probably gonna change the name, but for now, this is what we're calling it. We're probably not gonna change the name, because so many people are repeating it and it's catching on, even though everyone at first doesn't like it. So we'll put that there. But we started with Socially Conscious Animal Shelter, and we went to the CEO Forum. You wanna?
So the CEO Forum is a group of CEOs from across the country, animal welfare organizations from everywhere from the West Coast to the middle to just across the country. It's about 19 of us. Come together once a year to talk about what are the big things that we're all experiencing, how can we support one another, and again, building on that collaboration. So we had the opportunity to present the concept of socially conscious animal sheltering to that team. And again, I think the wonderful thing about animal welfare is that there's so much common ground. And we may have different philosophies and ways that we do the work, but we're at the end of the day, we're there for the animals. So this is an opportunity for us to present this concept to lots of organizations that, some of them are municipal organizations, some of them are small, some of them are really large, some of them have multiple organizations that are under their umbrella to say, does this resonate? Is this something that represents the work that we're doing? And we were so excited that the feedback we got was, yes, this really articulates how we approach. And we were able to get some of their feedback and tweak a few things just to make sure that it was something that was, again, it's about what can we be for? As an industry, as shelters from across the country, no matter what we're doing, how do we want to approach how we're treating the animals and people of our communities? So that was an exciting opportunity for us to test that.
Yeah, she was awesome. And there were two big things that we walked away from that conversation with. One is it needs to be larger than the shelter. It needs to be the community. So that's why we've created the socially conscious animal community. And this greater work has come out of that conversation. We have detailed, mandates or beliefs, infographics, inspiration for each one of these things. It would take a very long time to go into every single one. We have a website called scsheltering.org, and that is a place where you can get all the details of all the different infographics on it. Today we plan to go through the sheltering one in a lot of detail, and then at the end go through the one that's new or the public a little bit as well. So we talked about that. The other thing we got out of that conversation was, how are we gonna be able to say we're a socially conscious shelter? And this is from a lot of different groups. Is this gonna be something that you agree to, that you buy into? And so we are creating a logo right now, and we are going to have it be something that people start putting on their websites. We're a socially conscious shelter, start getting our language, our messaging out there. So we're in the process of doing that. Super exciting to see how that goes.
Yep.
So this is where we thought different community players engage and can make a difference in basically the reality of an animal or a pet in our community. We have started with cats and dogs with this conversation. There are lots of conversations about all the different animals. We have to start somewhere, get agreement somewhere, and then we'll look at expanding into other animals. So just know that we're kind of referring to cats and dogs today.
So obviously, in the center of all of this are the animals that we're serving. And then around this, we recognize that all of these groups have a vital part in creating a community that animals are well taken care of and that we're creating those best outcomes. So obviously, April's touched a little bit on the shelters. That's what we're all doing together in this room, which is work that we're doing here in this building and the buildings across the country. In addition to that, we know that rescues are an important part of animal welfare. So they serve a certain purpose, and they, in collaboration with shelters, can greatly enhance what we can do to the animals of our community. So they have a role in that. our veterinary community obviously is vital. I mean, that is where we know so many of animals and people get any education, any touch point. And as shelters and rescues, we're so reliant on that collaborative relationship with the veterinarians in town to ensure that the health of our community continues to be stable and increase. On the other side, law enforcement. So law enforcement, our field officers, so for those of us that are doing the animal care and control, or partner with our local sheriff's department, or with even our DA system to make sure that those laws that we have in place to protect animals are being enforced in a clean and effective way, and that we're working again in partnership because they have a piece of making sure that the public has the tools and the animals get the care they need. Along those lines, the media has a role, right? Like, where do we get from our news outlets? And I want to just thank Dr. Steele for all the work that she's done in really being a voice for this. You probably have seen some wonderful stories that have been run, and I don't know about you, but when she speaks, I'm like, yes, that is the message we want. Well, it's really wonderful, and we worked really hard to get the media to understand. It was good for them too, right? Because if they're not interacting with one of us, where are they getting their messaging, and how do we make sure that they understand what that common ground is and what are the best outcomes for the animals that we serve? So that's an important piece. Public policy. So those are our, the legislators that we elect and send to the Capitol, making sure that they understand what we need in terms of tools to be able to remain constantly improving how we take care of the animals and how those animals are protected, and that they also understand what the unintended consequences can be if they aren't thoughtful about legislation. And so I don't know if you want to speak about any.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. And then finally the you piece. So that's all of us. It's us as individuals. What is the role that we have when we take off our volunteer hats, when we take off our staff hats, and we're living out in that community? Gosh, this is about more than the decisions and things that shelters are doing or any one of these are doing. It's what we are collectively doing as a community. How do we raise animal welfare as a community? That's really what the long-term goal is here.
And I know we talked ad nauseum in the extreme team lunch breakfast yesterday about Pueblo, but I just want to kind of point out how what happened in Pueblo is represented here. So it started with not you, but general public. You guys are smarter than this. And public policy. Those are places where it started to go wrong. There was this no-kill movement that was being driven by a small group of people that were very passionate and very vocal, and there were policymakers that wanted to get elected or re-elected and weren't really necessarily looking at the true unintended consequences of the legislation and what would happen. The media bought on. I mean, I was noticing this recently when you see a lot of the Pueblo Chieftain and a lot of the editorials right now about what's happening. But you go back to what happened then, and they were talking about how we have to have a no-kill shelter and this is what else needs to happen. And so they bought in, and they weren't talking to people that could educate them in ways that they needed to be educated, tell the truth of the story. Law enforcement got involved later, so we're not gonna say they weren't necessarily involved at this point. Shelters obviously were involved, so HSPPR, the Bayside Heights Peak Region, is doing really great work down in that space, but this other group felt like they could run a no-kill shelter that was on a mission and really didn't know what they were getting into and didn't understand that this was a very big challenge for them and something that they'd never experienced before. And didn't know how to care for the animals that were under their roof, and so those animals were suffering in pretty horrible ways. Rescues could have helped in this, in that they could have transferred animals out, but the shelter wasn't asking, the shelter wasn't collaborating, so that broke down there. And then the veterinarians in the community is kind of interesting. They got pretty resentful about what happened during this whole process. They, everyone, there were death threats, it was nasty. The whole community was divided throughout this process. And so veterinarians weren't super keen to jump in and work with the no-kill group. So let's see how it all got fixed. It all got fixed starting with law enforcement. It was the PACFA, Pet Animal Care Facilities Act, state that went in and said this can't happen. These animals are suffering in a way that is completely unacceptable. Our laws don't allow this. And then the shelter said, okay, you're right, we're wrong, take our license. And then asked basically Proctor told them they had to get over 200 animals that they had to find placement for. So while the other shelters in the community stepped up, the socially conscious mostly, there were some no-kill shelters that stepped up too, and went and took all those animals out, and we took over 50, and just doing all of the really severe, I'm sure you guys have seen some of these animals here that came from home, some really severe respiratory infections, we had some other pretty severe injuries, broken legs, broken back on a dog, so there's some pretty severe stuff that we were dealing with. We actually had to reach out to veterinarians in our community, especially one, I'm gonna give her a plug, Dr. Epworth at Plum Creek, she's on our board, but she also took a really challenging dog that was in the center of the media attention, that we were concerned, I mean, we honestly probably would have made a euthanasia decision for that dog. The dog had a broken back and was in a lot of pain and had been sitting without care for 10 days, so the pressure sores were to the bones. And our team felt like it was going to take 2 or 3 bandage changes a day under anesthesia, and the dog was just starting to learn to walk again, but was continent, and we were able to control the pain. And so this veterinarian, that her team all agreed to take this dog on, his name is Dylan, and to help him, and he's doing great right now, he's actually looking better. So he has a pretty good prognosis. The public tide turned, right? They weren't going to accept the way those animals were being treated in that shelter at that time. And now they're saying, could you repeal the legislation? And now the policymakers did repeal the legislation. So, and then the media has said, okay, it's time to get behind them. So you can see how it's a holistic system, and it either works or it doesn't work. And we all need to figure out where we play that role. We all need to inform the public. You know how you do that next door, right? How when you see the next door act, don't take it to the kill shelter, and you guys jump on and say, well, let's have a conversation about that. We do have message points to help you with that, and we're gonna send them to Megan to redistribute with all the volunteers, because we got asked that again yesterday, and we created them last year, so we have those. So let's get into the sheltering one. We're gonna go through this. High level, if you'll just don't mind going over them, and then we'll go into each one and talk about what we mean by it. And we'd love this to be interactive. We would love your questions, because that helps us understand where there are nuances we need to explain better. The other thing I also want to put in your minds is we are looking for people to help tell the message. So if you want to help talk to others about socially conscious sheltering and what it means after you learn all about it today, please let Megan know, and we're creating a list of people that we're gonna really teach how to do that, and then have almost like a speakers bureau to help us get to work.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the things that I love about this, and these are the basic concepts that we're going to go into depth, but this is the overview. So much of the work that we do is I've heard, we've all used these, oh, it's so complicated, these are really complex things, and that's difficult for the public to sometimes understand. And so when you get concepts that maybe are more black and white, like no kill or not no kill, it sort of dumbs down the wonderful work that we're all doing together. And so that's what I love about this, is it starts to articulate and starts to tell that message and tell that story in a way that really represents the work that you all make possible and that we can do together. So these are the big pieces of the sheltering piece. The first is ensuring every unwanted or homeless pet has a safe place to go for shelter and care. You're sitting in there right now, right? Placing every healthy and safe animal, and that's really exciting. We're going to talk about that because that's a huge celebration. Assessing the medical and behavioral needs of homeless animals and ensuring those needs are properly addressed. Aligning policy with the needs of the community. Alleviating suffering and making appropriate euthanasia decisions. Considering the health and wellness of each animal and the community when transferring animals between communities. Enhancing the human-animal bond through thoughtful placements and post-adoption support. And finally, fostering a culture of transparency, ethical decision-making, mutual respect, and continual learning and collaboration. That's all. We did it on Tuesday, right?
Right. Well, it is. It's kind of just when you look at it, because we do that. It's really articulating our story. So let's go into this. So ensuring every unwanted or homeless pet has a safe place to go for shelter and care. Our terminology is open admission shelter, right? That's not public terminology. We're just trying to make people understand that when someone finds a stray dog and they can't keep it, or they have a crisis in their family and something needs to happen right now for that animal needs a safe place to be. When we brought this up at the CEO forum, I was a little bit worried about this one, so most concerning most, because there are people in that group that have managed admission shelters. And how are they gonna react? There are some managed admission shelters that do some really good work in our communities. The reaction was great. They said absolutely every community should have this. It doesn't mean every shelter has to be this, but every community should have this opportunity. There should not be a community where there's a need to find a safe place for an animal and there's not a safe place for that animal to go. So,
Does everyone know what managed admissions are? Does anyone not know that? They're so smart.
they are smart.
Placing every healthy and safe animal. We're doing this already. That is amazing. As a state, we are doing this. And, having been in animal welfare, the only place I've done animal welfare is Colorado. How lucky am I? Because this state has such a history of collaboration. All those other concepts that we're going to talk about make that possible. It's so exciting. This is something that is happening today. We need to celebrate that and shout it from the rooftops, because there are so many places where that isn't yet happening. And we believe that it's our responsibility to share the things that are working here so that that can spread across this country. This is the goal for the entire nation, right? This is why we do what we do. And I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful way of stating, what we're all working towards and what we're all achieving together. So placing that every healthy, so healthy meaning that, I've let the veterinarian in the room talk about the medical side. On the behavioral side, it's about that they're emotionally healthy, that they can be successful in that bond with that new family. And the same thing on the safe animals, so that we're making sure that we're putting animals out into the community that we know are going to be successful, not only in their own home, but in our community as a whole. So, Dr. Steele, how would you define healthy?
So when we say healthy, when we're defining this, we're not just saying the perfect animal. That this was the term that Lisa coined that I've said for years, is to just add water animals and then just go up for adoption. This means an animal that either shows no signs of clinical disease, or if they do, they have a good or excellent prognosis to have a comfortable life. So that includes a lot of animals that we used to call treatable, rehabilitatable. Those terms, these Asilomar terms have been incredibly useful. They're losing some of their power. Yeah, they serve their time, and we're moving on. So healthy is, a lot of that does include quite a few treatables. It's going to be different for every community. We luckily have resources where we can dig a little bit deeper, but we're never satisfied. Let's always dig a little bit deeper in that file and see what it looks like. Any questions so far? Assessing the medical and behavioral needs of homeless animals and ensuring these needs are thoughtfully addressed. So these are the animals that are within our shelter. These are the animals that we have taken responsibility for, and anything that happens to them while they're under our care is on us. This is what was not done in Pueblo. This is, when an animal comes to us and it's painful or it has a medical need, it's on us to make sure we have the veterinary care and the support and the team to make sure that animal's taken care of. It's also on us to make sure that that animal's not spinning in the shelter, in the cage, and throwing itself against a wall and circling so much that his feet are bleeding, like there's a Fremont County is doing right now. So it's a really, it's a big challenge, but it's the basics of sheltering, right? Do you want to talk to the environmental
So I think, it's recognizing that we have a responsibility both to all of the animals and then those individual animals. So for example, enrichment is such an important area. I know there's so much of that happening here at Dome Friendly. Recognizing that shelters, as wonderful as you all make it, and as caring as your staff is, it's still a stressful place to be in. It's a place of transition. So things like enrichment, so making sure that those animals are emotional, and we can get them calm and relaxed, and really interact with them in a way that builds that trust between the animal and our team, which then will translate to bring that animal into that new home. And so enrichment is a really big piece of that around the behavior piece. And that's something that I'm super excited continues to expand, and we continue to learn, and there's more science being applied to it. And, as April said, the veterinary scope also gets to continue to grow. But what we learn about how to handle animals and how to treat them and how to interact with them in the shelter environment continues to grow every day. And we're applying those lessons as we learn them. So that's an important part of being thoughtful and considering these animals individually and looking at the totality of the animals in our care.
Right, so suffering's not okay, especially ever, anywhere, but definitely not under our roof. So that's what that means. So alleviating suffering and making appropriate euthanasia decisions. Again, this goes back, and this is, we're trying to make this this is what we're for, we're positive, and people are like, that's a downer, but is it? So, when I practiced for 18 years, I used to say I could not practice medicine if I did not have the option of euthanasia. Because seeing animals suffer at the end of their life was something that I didn't do. And people make these decisions every day for animals they care about deeply. Sometimes they wait too long because they don't want to lose that animal. But when they make the decision, there's that sense of, wow, I missed that animal dearly and I did the right thing for my friend. And just because an animal's in a shelter doesn't mean we shouldn't be making those same decisions, obviously. I think all of us buy into that because we're here. But we need to be aware of what is this animal's quality of life, what can we do to make it better, and if we can't, then we need to make that euthanasia decision. And that's something that we're sharing. So this is, it's interesting because no-kill groups say this but don't do this. And so it's about really taking the risk. Now, years ago, many of you were here, some of you were here, it was harder. I mean, we were euthanizing 100, 200 animals a day. And that's really tough. But I would say that for the teams that have to make the decisions now, it's at least as tough because it's a choice, right? So it had to happen before that the system just wouldn't work and that didn't happen. Now we have the space, but is it the right thing for the animal? I have to choose, okay, I believe your behavior is causing you so much anxiety and stress or so much risk to the community that my team is gonna choose to do this hope is humane choice for you. And I think it's a whole different level of stress on the team because of that. But our team's willing to do it, and we have an amazing team that just says, yeah, we're gonna make these decisions. Are they perfect all the time? No. Do we strive to make them better all the time? Absolutely. Anything to add to that? Oh, I like to talk about this, actually. Aligning policy with the needs of the community. In many communities, it seems like when there's been a public outcry and there's been a push to create some legislation or to do something that maybe has some unintended consequences, there's a root of that disconnect. And that root is that the shelter is either not communicating really well and telling the public why they're doing things and what they're doing, or there's a lack of transparency, or they're not listening to their community to understand what their community needs are, and people get super frustrated and then they do something like try to pass legislation. So this is about listening to your community, understanding what is my community willing to take on. Let me give you an example that I think, and this changes, you don't do this once, right? This is a constant thing because 15 years ago, many of the animals we're adopting today would not be adopted. People would not have taken on either their medical or their behavioral challenges that people are willing to take on today. What about cats with kidney disease? We're making euthanasia decisions pretty regularly with cats with kidney disease that have some clinical signs of the disease, and we know that it's going to be fatal at some point in time, but we don't really know when. Do we know that our public won't accept that and that there won't be people that will adopt those cats? How do we know? We put them up for adoption and we see if they adopt them, right? So we're moving, that's the kind of conversation I'm having with the teams and that we need to always be having with our teams. What are we assuming about what our community will and won't take on? Now, we do have a responsibility to make sure we have a safe community. So one of the pieces of legislation that's really, the proper legislation had this in it, was that any animal had to be given to anybody who wanted it, no matter how unsafe it was. And we don't believe in that. We believe that the dog getting walked down the street with somebody is just as valuable, his life's just as valuable as a dog that likes to eat dogs. And so we have a level of responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen. And we need safe animals in our community so that people continue to have that positive affiliation with animals. If we keep it, but dangerous animals and people having negative associations, that's not gonna help the long-term fight for the animal. So we do have some level of responsibility. It's not just, okay, whatever you want, you have, but we have to understand what the public's willing to take on, what the capacity is, and then be willing to facilitate that as long as it's reasonable and doesn't put the safety of the public at risk.
And I would just say that it is about creating that basis of trust. And I know this is something that you all do so beautifully, and I think in Colorado we always strive to do, which is we're having conversations with our community. So if we take a risk, if we, for example, we decide to place an animal with a little bit of behavioral support post-adoption, we'll talk about that in a moment, but we're having that ongoing conversation, and if we recognize, gosh, we're seeing that animal come back in or something happen, that we're learning from that and we're being transparent with our community. So to your point, making sure that we're owning it when we take a risk and it doesn't work out, and we're celebrating when we've been able to move things forward, and we're thanking our community for being in partnership with us on that. So it is a constant evolution, and in 5 years, what we're putting out is going to look different than what we're doing today.
We hope, but otherwise we're not evolving, right?
Alright, so this is my favorite one. Enhancing the human-animal bond through thoughtful placements and post-adoption support. Because I'm sorry, that's ridiculous and adorable. Smile. We all have animals in our homes, right? And that, for many of us, that's how we came to this work, right? We experienced that firsthand. And I think adoption is definitely, it's not the biggest program it is, but it is a cornerstone of so much of what we do. And there's two sides to that, and that's what I love, because that human-animal bond and relationships that we share with our animals serve not only the animal, but they also serve the people, right? I know for myself, my dog River, popping her face in my licking my nose every morning is part of my children. So that thoughtful placements is about recognizing what is that animal need. And as we are taking different risks, or we're providing different treatments or support for those animals, we place them into our adoption center, we want to make sure that we are having good conversations with the folks that are coming in and for their next companions. And we come from that place of mutual trust and respect. We give people the benefit of the doubt when they come in. And we want to make sure that they understand what this animal's needs are going to be. So that the long term, that animal's needs emotionally and medically are taken care of. So if we make that good match, then on the other side of that, we also want to support that relationship, not only from the day that they take that animal home, but be that lifelong partner with that animal. And so through that benefit of doubt and giving them that trust and having those conversations, we want us to be the safety net if something comes up after that animal goes home. And so that post-adoption support is really important. And for organizations like the Dumb Friends League or the Humane Society of Lizard Valley, where we have high levels of expertise and resources, then maybe it's us providing that. If you're in a community where that isn't available, maybe it's, again, leaning on those veterinarians and those other behavior experts in your communities and creating partnerships so that if it's something that the shelter can't provide, that there's a place for that person to call and say, here's what I'm experiencing, what should I do? Maybe it's a hotline. So things, the kind of post-adoption support that we're talking about is follow-up veterinary care. So whether they're coming to our organizations for that or going to a local veterinarian. On the behavioral side, maybe it's just calling, it's our team will do a follow-up call and say, how are things going, what's cropping up? And again, making sure that because we started that conversation from a place of trust, that we know that when that family has something that they need some help with it, who are they going to call? They're going to call us. Because if that animal ultimately needs to come back to the shelter, that's okay too. We want to be that safety net for that relationship for the entire course of that relationship's life.
Yeah, and bringing them back to the shelter is actually a key point to this, because we don't want people to feel stuck. And if it's not a good fit or if something's discovered that's not working, we want them to come back to a safe place. This is a little different. I think this tenant is really countering a little bit of the retail rescue reality that's happening. So if you don't know what that means, a retail rescue is because there's such a demand for dogs in Colorado right now. There are some groups that are incorporating as nonprofits that are bringing in large numbers of dogs one day, adopting them out for $500 the next day, or the day later. They're not spaying, neutering, vaccinating. They don't know that they have heart disease. They don't know that they have parvo or distemper. And then when they break with those diseases, they do not provide any support for that. They do not allow the animal to come back. It's all your problem now. So we wanted to really speak to the fact that it's a responsibility when you adopt an animal. It's a responsibility to do what you can to make sure that animal's supported. And it also shows that when the animal's in your care, you're doing the right thing by them, because if you're going to stand behind the animal, you're not going to adopt a bunch of animals with parvo and distemper and be able to stay in business, right? So you need to, it's that whole continuum of that system. It's considering the health and wellness of each animal and each community when transferring animals between communities. And we talk a lot about this here, and I know Boulder does a lot of transfers as well, so because of that high demand, especially dogs, but starting to be cats too, we are bringing animals in from other communities to our community. And we are doing it very thoughtfully. So we know that many of the communities that have overpopulation problems also have heartworm. And we know that some of these communities have high levels of distemper, which is a horrible disease, right? So parvo. We have protocols in place so that they are vaccinated before they come and they're tested for heartworm, and if they're positive, we do the full treatment for them before we place them out so they're not at a risk to our community. Because we don't want to put our community's dogs at risk for these diseases. It would be like bringing in measles. Who would be okay with that, right? So it's a responsibility that we take very seriously when we move animals from one geographical location with one set of diseases to another geographical location. We have in Colorado, we're blessed by the fact we don't have a lot of these yucky diseases, these skin diseases, heartworm disease, because we have a nice cool season and then a warm season and we have lower humidity. But you bring in enough positive animals that are carriers, you will start seeing that change in your rural population. The state veterinarian's office feel like they've seen a significant increase in heartworm disease and in parvo. Some of the groups that are bringing them in as a retail rescue are just placing them and really putting our community at risk. And the state's looking at how do we regulate this because we can't allow that to happen. If these were cattle, this would have been shut down a long time ago. But because it doesn't have the economic impact of cattle, it's not being shut down yet. The other thing is, if we just take these dogs from these communities or cats and do nothing for those communities, their reality is never gonna change. And if our ability to transfer changes, then they're right back in the same fight they were before, euthanizing these healthy, young animals. So what can we do to support their work in that community? And as you know, one thing that we've done here is we've added any animal we're transferring in with our transfer partners from Oklahoma or Delpart, Texas, we add $50 to their adoption fee, and then we send that back to that shelter so that they can invest in spay, neuter, vaccines, humane education, whatever that is. I just got an email yesterday from Kay, who's the executive director of Cause Bonita in Oklahoma, and we're sending them checks randomly, so it's not like we're paying budget and then it doesn't get distributed the way it should be for special projects. So we're playing their game a little bit, but we just sent them a $10,000 check, and they were ecstatic. And they're dividing it up between the different groups that then transfer to them and trying to really impact humane education and spay neuter in all of these different communities. So we want to become irrelevant to them. We don't want them to need us anymore because then we can go to another community and impact them.
When would you graduate from being
You do! Do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would say too is the other thoughtful consideration that we make is for the animals themselves, right? Because transport can be stressful. So again, making sure that we're looking at what does this animal need. And sometimes that may mean it needs to stay where it is, but if it's okay for them to go, then maybe that's the chance that they have to find the resources they need to find that loving family. So it's a wonderful tool, and it is not a solution to everything.
And there probably will be a day when this is not as much of a tool anymore, right? But that means we're successful. So yeah, it's amazing.
Question.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how transfers come about? Do communities come to you? How does this?
So I can speak to League and then you can speak to Boulder. We get requests probably every week or two. We get a new organization wanting to transfer with us. We have chosen, especially during the construction, but we'll probably continue this, is to have a philosophy that we want a partner. We don't want to just take animals from 50 different places. And we've done that in the past. Like, sure, send them over, whatever. And so we've chosen to work with two groups right now that we get weekly transfers of 30 animals from each one pretty regularly. Dogs now, but paws very regularly. And because of the system we're trying to create. When we have the new space in August, we're going to really be, it's a responsibility to have that space. We're going to have to step up to the plate. We're going to be limited in veterinary services, so we'll have a bottleneck there, so I'm mindful about that. But we will be accepting transfers from other groups, and we've told several groups, hold on, we'll get back to you, and later in the year once we figure out our new space. So our experience is they usually are reaching out to us.
We've been transferring for not forever. We've had as many as 45 partners, and now we've got like 15 to 20. And I think, as April said, it is a partnership. So we're saying, if you want to transfer with us, here's what we expect from you, here's what you can expect from us. And, we'll try a few transfers, and if that works, great, or we'll have feedback that's going back and forth. But it is about being responsible on both sides of that. I think the other thing that in Colorado that we're really committed to, and I just appreciate the collaboration that like HSP, these acronyms, that the Humane Society of Boulder Valley does with Dumb Friends League or HSPPR, that we're recognizing where is this animal's best shot. So is it the Humane Society of Boulder Valley because of the behavioral support that we have, or is it the Dumb Friends League because of all of the amazing things that this organization can do. So again, that request comes in and doing that matching. So, and I think that's something that we're constantly talking about, and as we look to the future of transport, I think that's going to become a more fundamental piece of that conversation, is that we have centers of excellence or areas where one animal with this might have better resources. So it's not as simple as just requests and sending them out. It is taking all of that matrix into account.
When I say we have 2 transfer partners, I talk outside of interstate. Of course, within Colorado, we have quite a few transfer partners because we prioritize Denver Metro, the state of Colorado, and then outside of Colorado. So we take all kinds of animals almost every day from Denver or Aurora. The Centers of Excellence idea I really like, so hopefully they'll be. So fostering a culture, I'm not going to read it all to you, it's a long one. So this is something that we truly believe in, and we believe that, again, aligning with your community, so having them understand if we hide all the things that are challenges to us, how are they going to help us solve the problem, right? When we're back in the early 70s, you've all probably seen this graph, we're receiving 45,000 animals and placing just over 5,000 animals and euthanizing 250 a day. If we don't tell that story to the public, how are we going to get to the point we are now, where their adoption is the cool thing to do, and the difference between, now we're receiving 22,000 animals and placing over 19,000 animals. So those ones that we're not placing, for the most part, are the ones that absolutely need to have a euthanasia decision. I think there's always a little gray zone there with fearful dogs or some behavior dogs. We talked about some kidney, asking your community what they would accept, but it's all with the best intention to try to do the right thing for the animals. So communicating that's been very, very important. And then the collaboration piece, some of you might know that we're doing a collaboration with Fosco, and they're a rescue that has a skill set or an ability to do some things that we can't do in the shelter, such as we do some of this through our foster, but it expands that opportunity. So a dog is just not doing well with the noise of the shelter or the activity of a shelter. These rescues have they're home-based, so they can actually help them through our behavior foster. We're doing that too, but we didn't have that much engagement in that, and they had quite a few homes. What didn't they do well with? They don't have a veterinarian, so they were spending 70 or 80% of their budget taking their dogs to practitioners, and the practitioners were trying to give 50% off, so they weren't making any money either, but it was really just sucking all their resources dry. So if an animal can be transferred to us, we can assess it, take care of its veterinary needs, and then if it's an animal that needs a very specific, specialized veterinary care, they can fundraise around that single animal, such as a back surgery or a heart valve replacement. They have a mechanism to raise $10,000 for one animal and go do that. It's hard for us to message when we have so many animals that we're treating. Or if it's a behavior case that they feel like they want to see how it does in a home and how they can be worked with. The other thing we do really well is adoption. We have people come through all the time. They don't have a facility. So yes, they're doing events here and there. Could they come in and have some of their animals come up for adoption here so they get through the system and they have more room for more animals? So it just makes sense that that's a collaboration works really well, and it doesn't just mean shelters and rescues, it's shelters and shelters, it's shelters and veterinarians, it's shelters and the public. We just need to make sure we're collaborating well. So that is the end. I'm gonna go fast. So that's the end of the tenants for shelters. Do you feel like there's anything blatantly missing that's something that we stand for? Do you think there's something in here that shouldn't be in here? Any questions or concerns about it? Thoughts?
I'd like to know a little bit about if there is a systemic evaluation going on to kind of look at program evaluation and if that information is readily available.
Within the organization or within the community?
Really both,
Yeah.
actually.
So within the organization, yes, it was a strategic plan item that started 2 years ago, and first thing was to figure out the list of all the programs that need to be systemically evaluated, and then how it was going to happen. So it's been a little bit of a process because there are a couple hundred items on that list if you really sit down and write down everything that we do. We're learning from the first several that we've done. Adoptions is one of them, which is probably too big of a bite to chew on because of all the different details of it. As they are finished, they're becoming available on the intranet. And I need to check to see if there's parts of the intranet that are available to everybody, there's parts that are limited, so I need to make sure that it's the available part for you guys. But it's something that's public and we're sharing it and we're making. One thing that we did evaluate was the Metro Dog Stray Project. So many of you know that when strays come in that were found in Denver or Aurora, we have an agreement with Denver and Aurora that we will transfer them back to their home shelter because there were studies done a long time ago, probably 10 years ago, that showed that animals were more likely to be adopted if they were taken to the shelter, the municipal shelter of the city that they were found in. And the idea is they would transfer their animal or their owner relinquished to us. This is for dogs, not cats, but this has been going on for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. You guys probably know longer than I do how long it's been going on. It's not working. I mean, what's happening now is because probably Dumplings Lake is so well known in the Denver metro area that Mary's often driving a dog over to Denver, or someone in the transfer department is driving a dog to Aurora, and the owner comes here looking for the dog and then has to chase the vehicle over to wherever that is. So once we have the space open up, we're gonna stop that program. So that is one example of, but yes, we have started doing that and it takes much longer than I expected it to. Do you guys do that? Systemic evaluation of your programs?
Yes, and I think that's one of the things I'm super excited about in terms of socially conscious sheltering is, again, if we look at those tenets and measure ourselves against those, I think that's where we get to that systemic measurement, right? How are we viewing how we're all working well together, and how can we, instead of having just 1 or 2 metrics that we're putting up as, oh, well, these are the things we should be looking at, but it's really that comprehensive look, and we can start to measure ourselves against, are we getting closer to those tenets? Are we achieving those tenets? And what's the conversation need to be amongst the system to make sure that that's what we're driving towards?
So it seems like this program is only going to be as good as its weakest link, and that if there are gaps, that's where the problems are. And it's a system of accountability, and who takes the ownership for sort of leading. And it sounds like maybe there's an organization where there are representatives from each of these elements at the table. But an example would be like in behavior. Not all shelters have the same kind of behavioral commitment or the follow-up that the Dumb President has. And the problem with that is that once there is an issue out in the community resulting from that experience, that's what hits next door. And it's a failure of the overall system because it's a failure in that one location. And so who takes kind of the lead in corralling this and identifying those weak links and then talking about what the repairs might be?
So I think that's a potential next step, because what we are messaging right now is these shelters have agreed to the tenets of socially conscious sheltering. We're not certifying that they're doing all the socially conscious sheltering, and we really don't have a governing body that can do that right now, especially if it goes national. There's just that becomes almost like AHA veterinary accreditation, and you have to go in and you have to inspect and you have to do all that. We do risk reputation damage if we have a shelter that says they're a socially conscious shelter and then it hits the news or someone finds out that they're not doing any behavior enrichment and animals are spinning in their kennels. But if the languaging of the messaging is this shelter has committed to following all of these procedures, then they're the ones that lied and failed and didn't follow all of those procedures. It is not that different, and I didn't wanna use these words once, but I have already. It's not that different than what No Kill is doing, right? So they have a 90% rate and you do this and you do that and you can call yourself No Kill. It's not necessarily being enforced, it's a brand. And it's a brand that people have bought into and are really holding on to tight. We're trying to create a different brand. Yes, we want every single shelter to follow every single one of these tenets, but we, our role as I see it now, and I'd love to hear what you say, Lisa, is that we set them out as this is what the expectations are. You get to choose whether you get to want to be a socially conscious shelter or not be a socially conscious shelter. And if you say you are following these tenets, then you can use this logo or this name. It shows you believe in the tenets, and if that's probably as far as we go right now. Could we someday go further? Maybe.
I think it also allows us to, again, identify where are those weak links. So if I'm a shelter that says I'm gonna adhere to these tenets, I think there's an opportunity for us to have some thoughtful conversations about which are the ones that are hardest for my organization to achieve, and then how can I collaborate with organizations that have more resources or expertise. Because it's not about every shelter doing everything. That's just not gonna happen. But it is about making sure that we are getting animals to where they need, and if a shelter doesn't have those resources, then how do those of us that do have resources partner with them, or how do we take that animal and place it into a different community? So I agree with April that this is a first step. This gives us it just changes the conversation, and I think it does invite us to say, okay, what's in the way of being able to achieve these, and how can we help as a community to get, if, for example, either other organizations to help, or within that community, if I'm in a community that wants to do those things but it's not achievable, what do I as a member of that community need to do to help my shelter be able to say, yep, we're doing all of this. So whether that's volunteering or making donations or taking better responsibility of the animals that I already have so they don't go into the shelter system, it just changes the dynamic of the conversation, and it's a first step in that direction.
I heard from a shelter not that long ago that isn't here yet. But you know what they did? They took this and they made this their strategic plan. So it's really neat to give it moving towards something that's really effective.
What about the shelter's responsibility to make sure the animal's going into a good home for the animal? And I know places like Maxwell, I think, go too far that way, so they're
Right.
adopted, but I don't know, I get the impression we've not, obviously don't do home inspections.
Right.
Crazy.
Right. So that's where the thoughtful placements come in. Would you speak to open versus closed? No, I will. So there are
Close adoption.
yeah, so there are good studies that show you can go through all those different, you can do the home inspections, you can do the call the landlord, you can ask the, you can do psychovalve, no, I'm just kidding. But that might actually help. It doesn't change the outcomes, the longevity, the bond that forms with the animal and the family. So we have moved more towards what we're calling thoughtful adoptions. Okay, what do you want to do with this animal? Do you want to go hiking? Do you want to sit on a couch and not ever leave the house? And what is the right animal for that lifestyle that will help you achieve that? We do, and it's interesting. So we have some placement partners, and I asked my team, okay, why are we using a placement partner for this dog? And let's say it's a German Shepherd, and it's German Shepherd Rescue. Well, because they understand German Shepherds really well, and they can make sure it gets placed in the best home and educated. And while that's true, I challenge the team that we have the biggest behavior department in the metro area, so why are we the ones that understand German Shepherds and being able to have these conversations? But the reality is part of what they're looking for and what that success is because they do have much more stringent adoption requirements. And it wouldn't work for us to adopt those requirements. It wouldn't work for 99% of the animals that are going through the shelter. But if we're trying to place one that before would be a euthanasia decision and this is a challenging placement, that might be absolutely necessary in that situation. So working, again, collaborating with rescue group that has that infrastructure and has that, that's just their philosophy, works.
And I would say that, again, as we mentioned before, we always come from a place of trust. Does that mean that sometimes that mismatch is gonna happen? Of course, right? The Community Study Group of Valley about in 2010 instituted a policy called the Adoption Satisfaction Guarantee, which meant that no matter when, at any point in an animal's life, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 years, 5 years, if you decide this isn't the right match, you can come back to the Humane Society and we'll refund your money. And I remember our team was like, oh my God, everyone's gonna bring the animals back. What do you think it did to our return percentage? Nothing. And in fact, you know, yes, people brought those animals back, but as April mentioned, that process, like I always say, people come and spend a couple of hours with an animal while we have that conversation, or we're trying to do the best to listen for what that animal, how the animal's needs might be met. But sometimes it takes a few weeks or a month when you're living with that animal day to day. I didn't pick my husband after talking to him for 2 hours. It took me 3 years. So these are lifelong relationships that we're hoping to make. So I think if we're coming from a place of trust and we're opening that dialogue and we're creating that post-adoption support, that by and large, most of them, it's gonna be a good fit. And if it's not, we're gonna be there to welcome that animal back in, we're gonna know more about that animal, and we're gonna know more about what that family needs for that next match.
Any other questions about the sheltering piece of this? We have 5 minutes to talk about the use of it. And you guys are already, you're Ewing. But to share with the greater community as well. So we're not gonna go into all the details, we just have the one slide on this. So supporting socially conscious animal welfare organizations, thank you. It's truly, No Kill's become a fundraising brand. It really isn't doing a lot for the animals. And so when people, just cringe when people say, oh, I gave you this donation because you're No Kill. And the answer is, we're not No Kill, we're socially conscious. Let me tell you what that means. And that's what we really want people to be looking for when they want to be making a difference in animal welfare.
Adopting and fostering pets. I mean, it is, it's kind of like a place of pride in Boulder, and I'm sure it is in Denver too, when you see someone, where'd you adopt your animal? And that's so great that we're achieving that, but again, that we want our communities to come to organizations like ours to find that next animal and to foster pets before they're ready to go into that new home.
And we need everybody in the public to report cruelty and neglect when they see cruelty and neglect. People don't think that that's easy to do, or they're scared to do it, or they're not sure about it. You call Crime Stoppers, you can be anonymous, it's super, super easy. Crime Stoppers has a whole arm that goes through Colorado Humane Society, and then we distribute it out to whatever group it has a jurisdiction over it. So tell people about that, share that information with them, and have people appreciate what humane law enforcement does for our community. They're no longer the dog catcher, right? They're making sure that everyone is safe and the animal is well cared for, and providing resources and educating people more than they are giving tickets and those types of things. So that's changed, and we need to help the community understand that's changed.
Valuing that human animal bond. So really understanding that, again, that bond, how healthy that bond is a reflection of how healthy our community is. And recognizing too that we serve animals first and foremost, that is why we are here. And animals often can then be the bridge to serving that family as well. And I think some of the things that we're doing in conjunction with our Health and Human Service organizations so that they can alert us when an animal's in need and we can alert them when there's a person in need, that bond is why they're called companion animals, right? They are companions to us and we are companions to them.
You guys are doing the next one right now, seeking to understand the complex world of animal welfare. I think anytime any of you have had the joy of having a conversation with someone that really doesn't get it at all, it's so frustrating because you see the logic and you understand it, but you have to tell them this piece and then this piece, and it fits in, and there was that thing over there. So it's not something that a soundbite or a sentence or two is going to get you there, but you guys have obviously committed to this, and we're hoping that more people do.
Volunteering! Yay! Okay, you will know what that is. But again, to your point, when you raised that question before, like what if the community isn't achieving all of these, does the community need to volunteer at that shelter? Do they need to say, yes, I'll come, after work and do whatever? But that volunteering piece, oh my gosh, if we had to pay for the staff that would backfill the hours, I mean, none of us would be able to do what we do. It just wouldn't be sustainable. So volunteering, obviously, you guys know firsthand. So
Thank you.
volunteering.
So understanding the consequences of animal legislation, the public has a huge role in what policies are passed. They had a huge role in Pueblo in what policies were passed. They didn't understand the unintended consequences, and they convinced the community that this was the right thing. If such a piece of legislation came to Aurora, what would we do? Could we activate our volunteers to go testify at the city council and to make sure that they're educated and ask you guys to be a part of the conversation so that not that only this really small passionate group is there, but this entire community that really gets it is there. So there might be a time, and I am thinking there will be a time in the not too far future where we are going to ask of you and people who know this world well to be a voice, so that we don't have that legislation. Hopefully there'll be a point where that's not a concern anymore, but it is still.
And then this last one is that we all need to take responsibility for our pets' medical, behavioral, and social needs. And when we're doing this, then the shelter doesn't have as many animals coming in its front door, right? So again, educating the community about this is not just about decisions that shelters are making, this is about how we treating our animals, how do we make sure they have access to the medical and behavioral care that they need, and how do we ensure that they stay healthy their whole lifetime. And so that's a really key component. We all have a personal responsibility to that.
I hope when you hear this one, you guys feel really good about yourselves because
We're not shut apart.
we obviously are talking to the friendliest, most educated group about this. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the time you spend here, but also the time you spend understanding why we do things and what we're doing and what this world is all about. So thank you guys so much for being here and for volunteering, and happy Volunteer Week.
Yes, guys, I just want to give a huge thank you to both Lisa and April for taking the time to do this today. I hope you guys found it as interesting as we do. So, thank you all for coming, of course. We have some donuts in the back. Feel free to help yourself on the way out. And we also have pizza in the lobby for those pizza. So, please enjoy lunch. And also, I just want to give a quick shout out to Kat. Many of you know her. One of the emails with her. Today's her birthday. So,
Yeah.